Talking Iowa State football, we got Levi Stevenson on the line from Wide Right Natty Light. It's on the SB Nation platform for Iowa State athletics. You mentioned the name Mike Rose. He's a star. He's one of these the team for being a low-profile team and being an up-and-comer has more returning star players than just about anybody I can think of in college football between Kohler, Hall, Purdy, and now Mike Rose. People that follow college football know Mike Rose. He almost had 100 tackles in a short season and 5 picks.
Yeah, he's exceptional. He led the Big 12 in interceptions as a linebacker. He does everything. Originally, it's funny because he came out of Brecksville, Ohio. He was a 218-pound true freshman linebacker, which that's pretty small. Even in Big 12, where you generally have slightly thinner and faster guys to keep up with the passing offenses, that's still small for Big 12. It's still small for a Big 12 linebacker. But then we heard going into the South Dakota State game that year that we heard Mike Rose is starting. Like, okay, like we've got a bunch of other guys. We don't have to start a true freshman. It's fine. And then all he's done since then has been extraordinarily consistent. He's been really good ever since then. And as the story goes too, there's a good Matt Campbell quote or quip from him or whatever, is that he called Mike Rose's parents like 3 days before the game and said, "Hey, you guys might want to get a ticket out here because your son's starting this weekend." And the parents just lost it. And he came out here, and all he's done since then is be one of the best linebackers in the Big 12. And he was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year this season, led the Big 12 in interceptions, and he's back as a true junior. And, like you said, I think people that pay attention to college football know who Mike Rose is. But I hope he gets a chance this season. If Iowa State can be as good as I think they will be, hopefully he gets a chance to really stand out and start putting himself into, even if you don't necessarily follow college football as much, you should know who Mike Rose is. He is really good. Any defensive nerds or defensive aficionados that really get into watching defense, watch Iowa State, watch the three down front, watch the cloud defense, watch Mike Rose. His gap assignment, his gap assignments and his gap discipline on run plays is phenomenal. It's unbelievable.
I'm continuing to look through this roster and come across names that, again, that seem to have been identified with the program forever.
Yep.
You mentioned Jaquan Bailey, 13 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. So he moves on.
Yep.
But you got a ton of tackles out of guys like Jake Hummel. Ishim Young was unfortunately the guy that
we're going to need to talk about Ishim Young here in a second. He's quite the player.
Unless I'm missing it, if my recollection was within the first 15 seconds of the Big 12 championship game, he was thrown out of the game for targeting, which was a horrible call, if I recall.
It was awful. It was really bad.
It was awful. So you can take off on the defense, Levi, because there's a ton of guys that I'd like to hear about. Greg Ellsworth's another guy that's a really good player.
Greg Weiser, it's an interesting story too, but you mentioned Jake Hummel. Jake Hummel is a guy that him and Orion Vance are the other two linebackers. There's 2 starter linebackers, and they both really fly under the radar. Jake Hummel is kind of a Mike Rose clone. You can on the field, you can barely tell them apart, other than the fact that Mike Rose doesn't wear leggings and Jake Hummel does. But that's like the only way to tell them apart on the field. And they're both extremely similar players. If Mike Rose has to come off for a few plays, and Jake Hummel's the leader, you really honestly may not even notice. I mean, they're nearly identical players. I'm not saying that Jake Hummel is like every bit as good as Mike Rose, but if you have to lose Mike Rose for a half and just rely on Jake Hummel, there isn't a single Iowa State fan that's losing any sleep. No one's worrying about it because Jake Hummel and Orion Vance are perfectly capable linebackers. Mentioned Greg Eisworth. It's funny because Greg Eisworth was a grad transfer, and he is now getting ready to play his 4th season now as a grad transfer, 3rd season. He's been here forever. His first season was 2018, so he's already played 3. He's getting ready to come into his 4th season of playing for Iowa State after grad transferring. So that tells you how long Greg Eisworth has been there. He was at Ole Miss, forever ago, and then he went to a JUCO for a year, came to Iowa State, played right away, and he's been really, really good safety. His 28. A little bit of 2018 and 2019, a little bit of 2020. He had some injury issues. He had a shoulder that was kind of bad. But he was healthy towards the end of this season. And he racks up quite a few tackles. He doesn't necessarily jump off the stat sheet or off on the film, but man, the guy just does his job. He's extremely smart. He just does whatever you ask him. He's the perfect safety. He doesn't take any weird risks. He doesn't, so he maybe doesn't make as many big plays as other people, but he also doesn't mess up, which is really what you're looking for out of your safety. He just does exactly what he's supposed to. He's been rock solid. There's a reason that he's been getting all Big 12 recognition at the end of the season, basically his entire career. But another guy you mentioned though is Isheem Young, and man, Iowa State fans are really excited about this kid. He kind of really first made his presence known on the field against Oklahoma the first time around when he picked off Spencer Rattler in the end zone to seal that game. But if you rewind it back a little ways during his recruiting process, because he was originally a Penn State commit, and then he had some off the field issues wherever ended up decommitting, and then Iowa State grabbed him and brought him out here. And I remember talking. So I was at a charity function. I don't remember what it was, but I was talking to John Haycock, Iowa State's defensive coordinator, and Isheem Young came up. And man, when I mentioned, like, what do you think of Isheem Young? And his eyes just lit up. He's like, man, that kid can play. And now we're seeing, and now he's playing he was the third safety, now going to be the second safety with the departure of Lawrence White. But he was like a mid 4-star guy. He was a really, really talented guy coming out of high school. And Iowa State is really lucky to have him because he is absolutely like a playoff team level talent. I mean, he could easily find a spot on a Clemson or an Alabama or something like that. He could find a spot in there. He's that good. It would not shock me it wouldn't shock me at all if he has a good season next year and Iowa State has a good season and he's a part of it. Wouldn't shock me at all to see him win like Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year next year. Wouldn't shock me one bit. He's really, really good.
Will McDonald's got a lot of havoc plays. Yes. Will McDonald with 13 tackles for loss and 10.5 sacks coming back?
As anybody that's played against Will McDonald can attest to you, there is no way you can't block Will McDonald. You can either hold him or hope to God he doesn't get to your quarterback in time. There is no way to block him. He's unbelievably quick, and he's getting dangerous now because before, when he had like 6.5 sacks or 6 sacks or whatever it was 2 seasons ago, a lot of that was just raw athleticism, just running past people. He's a little bit undersized. He's not like a 260-pound defensive end. He's more like 235 or 235 or something like that in there. Maybe up to 240, but he's probably more like 230, 235. What that does is give him speed. And he's burning people off the edge just with raw speed. But then if you go back and watch this past season where he had 10.5 sacks, and the guy's doing Dwight Freeney spin moves, he's running past people, he's ripping under people. I mean, this guy's, man, like I said, defensive nerds. You didn't have to be a defensive nerd to appreciate Will McDonald. Just watch him. Just keep an eye on number 9. And the amazing thing is, how he's got 17.5 career sacks. So if he has exactly the same season he had last year and this year, he will be the all-time leader in sacks at Iowa State as a redshirt junior. And you know how many career starts he has? 0. He has never started a game in his life. He's doing this without starting football games, and he's coming in and getting 10.5 sacks, and he's coming in and getting ready to be the all-time leading sack person as a junior. And the guy's incredible. Just watch number 9. If you ever watch Iowa State, watch number 9 on the edge. He's usually on the right side, and he will cruise right past that left tackle. And Texas found out the only way you can contain him is to hold him. If you go back and watch, there's a lot of holding on Will McDonald. And when they don't get away with it, there's a penalty. And if they don't try to hold him, he gets to the quarterback. That's just what happens. Spencer Rattler found that out. Well, Sam Ehlinger found that out. A lot of people found that out the hard way this past season. This defense is so much fun to talk about. There's so many good people on this defense. I love it.
It looks like it. And a lot of them I'm familiar with, but I'm also learning about some other ones. Anthony
Johnson's another one that's been around, seemed like forever too, as the corner. He really took a nice step up last season.
Talking up the Cyclones, coming off, of course, 9-3, a Big 12 championship game appearance in the first ever New Year's Six/BCS big bowl game win, the Fiesta Bowl win over Oregon, 34-17. So it was mentioned in the chat, and certainly I was going to hit upon what people talk about this time of year between December and February, and that's recruiting rankings.
Mm-hmm.
People seem to be at times a bit more enamored with that than your win-loss record, which is a bit ridiculous, but 8th ranked in the Big 12, number 59 nationally. So a lot of people would get hung up on, okay, what's going on here? Because Matt Campbell's amazing and people are really liking what's going on at Iowa State. You would think that would just spike.
Well, I think you're going to see this upcoming classes where you're going to see the bump, because it's, going to an Alabama Bowl or going to a Camping World Bowl is a lot different than winning a Fiesta Bowl against Oregon, who's one of the most visible programs in the country, especially to recruits. So I think you're going to see like this upcoming class, the 2022 classes, where you could see an uptick. Because I'm looking at who Iowa State's been going after. There's a lot of the really high 3 stars and a lot of the low to mid 4 stars that they're really going after. But to reiterate, I'm actually wearing a shirt. It says 5-star culture, as the infamous Breece Hall quote went after the Texas game. It said it's 5-star culture versus 5-star recruits. And all what you need to know about Iowa State is that you said the number 8 in the Big 12 for recruiting ranking. Is that right? For the 2021 class? There's a good chance that their preseason AP ranking is going to be better than that coming into this next season. If you need to know how good Iowa State's at Matt Campbell is, if you need to know what it means to have a good culture, Iowa State could probably be ranked higher than number 8 in the AP poll coming this fall, even if they're not there in the Big 12 recruiting rankings. We like rubbing recruiting rankings in people's faces too, because
you should.
Because we heard it a bunch before the Fiesta Bowl. All the Oregon fans were talking about, well, we got Kayvon Thibodeau and we got the 8th ranked recruiting class and all this. And what did Iowa State go and do? Beat the snot out of them. Just went there and they held 42 minutes of possession. I mean, it wasn't close, but I mean, to be an Oregon fan, that game must have been a nightmare. And like, they did it with a bunch of 3 stars, and all they did was they just ran and converted short yardage downs. They converted with tight ends. They just out executed a team that is loaded with 4- and 5-star talent. Didn't seem to phase them. Doesn't seem to phase them when they play Oklahoma.
Nope.
Doesn't seem to bother them. And I'm pretty sure Iowa State's pretty happy with riding the wave of we don't care about recruiting stars.
Yeah, it's working. That's all there is to it. It's working. And whether and I'm sure it's some combination. It can't any one thing, because it's got to be got to be a combination of finding guys that truly are athletically and in a football sense 4 stars, but they're just rated as 2 and 3 stars.
Yeah, because
finding
it's just one little thing. Yep. Whether they're buried in Ohio someplace, buried somewhere in rural Ohio, or they're, maybe a little bit smaller like Will McDonald, because Will McDonald was only 218 pounds as a defensive end coming out of high school. So, I mean, he didn't get a lot of attention, but here he is.
Yeah, it's a combination of finding those guys, but it's also the combination of that with developing guys that may have gone somewhere else and never gotten developed and turned out to be role players for a middling Big 12 team, let's say. And being able to find something there that, hey, yeah, he's got these flaws, but we see this in him, and we think we've got the coaching staff that can bring that out of him, and we've got the scheme and the fit to do it.
All right. Brock Purdy could have gone to Texas A&M or Alabama, because he had offers from both of them. He had offers from Alabama and Texas A&M, and he could have gone there and sat behind the depth chart and never played a snap. But he went to Iowa State, and here he is, and now he's Brock Purdy.
Yeah, and so, Levi, I've got to be critical about something. So this is what I'm going to come up with, because I do really like this team. For not having a rooting interest, you do understand that most of College Football Nation, if not generally all of College Football Nation, roots for you.
So that's an interesting one. So I heard an interesting it was a show, I think it was maybe from 247 last week or something. One of their hosts was talking about how, while college football fans are generally kind of enamored with the whole Iowa State thing, and they're the underdog that's coming up, that Iowa State is actually, amongst like administrators and within football programs, is actually kind of hated, because they are kind of breaking this mold. Because there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of schools that are below the blue chippers, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, whatever else, that are below them, but they're not a group of 5. So they're where they exist in this middle tier of teams that, are good, but they're not good enough. And you hear a lot from them saying, well, the college football system is holding us down, it's holding us back, it's built against us and all this. But Iowa State is going through there and saying, no, you can win just fine. You don't have to have 5-star guys across the board to win. That you can do this. Like, it's not impossible to win at Iowa State, even though it's out in the middle of, it's out in the middle of a cornfield and there's nothing else around it or whatever. You can still win lots of football games here if you make good hires, you have a good program, and you have a good culture. So it's kind of like, for a lot of schools, I I don't know any specific ones, but for a lot of schools that have existed in that middle tier for a long time that says, well, we just can't bust through because we can't, because there's just too much working against us. College football stacked against us. Well, Iowa State's going through and kind of exposing that lie. There's a lot of administrators that have been telling their fans for a long time, well, we just can't do it because we don't have the resources or whatever it is.
I would say that that's debatable to a certain extent.
Sure.
Because yes,
certainly.
what Iowa State's doing is remarkable based on its history.
Right.
And based on what they're accomplishing right now. But it was one season that they won a major bowl game.
Sure,
it was one season in which they went 9-3 and came within a possession of winning the Big 12 championship game. The other seasons are nice, but
they've got to prove it now. They've got to prove it in 2021 for sure.
Yeah. The 7-5s and 8-4s before that are really nice. But that's what you're going to find at their neighboring Iowa. That's what you're going to find at a lot of 4th and 5th place schools and Power 5 conferences across the nation. And I guess the debate there would be, it depends what you consider winning, because some people, to them, you need to go to a playoff and you need to win college football playoff championships. And that's what it's all about. And the debate would be, you do need to recruit like the 3 that go there all the time.
Right. Yep. I'm certainly not trying to crown Iowa State as all of a sudden, no, we're a blue blood now. That's not the case.
Sure.
But you got to remember where Iowa State came from, where it's not just a middling school. It's like there's middling, and then to quote Billy B, and then there's 12 feet of shit, and then there's Iowa State. They were way down there, and so just getting Iowa State to like a regular bowl game is a Herculean task. Iowa State's got them competing for Big 12 championships, and now they're going into a season probably as safely a top 10 team and as one of the favorites to win the Big 12. It's Oklahoma and Iowa State, and then there's a gap, and then there's the rest of the conference. And then as a sort of dark horse to make the college football playoff. I don't know if you could even call them a dark horse because they're not totally coming out of nowhere anymore. I mean, they may be just a legit contender to make the playoff, which you're saying, well, that doesn't sound like, but it's Iowa State. This isn't like taking Oklahoma State, or this isn't taking like some school that kind of ends up here and there once in a while, like a Louisville or something like that, where they just kind of show up once in a while up higher in the rankings. This is Iowa State, who is one of the losingest Power 5 programs in history, and now they're competing for titles. But the thing is, though, is if you watch it, it doesn't feel like a one-off thing. It doesn't feel like a flash in the pan, because it's been a slow buildup. It's not just a one season where they had just some random really good player that was awesome. Well, kind of like a Louisville, where they had Lamar Jackson and they were really good, and then all of a sudden they're kind of down here again. It's not just one player that's really, really awesome that's propelling them into a whole bunch of wins. It's a stable build up through by utilizing, by building the offensive line and building the defensive line and building the defense first, and then getting your playmakers and building out from there. So it feels like a really stable build that's not gonna collapse when you have a star player go away. Like when you have, when Brock Purdy decides to leave, this will be his 4th season, so he could reasonably leave. Behind him is a 4-star quarterback, Hunter Deckers, that has shown out really, really well, and a lot of people are really excited about. It could be better than Brock Purdy. Losing Brock Purdy isn't going to kill them. A lot of people thought that when Alan Lazard was graduating, that they were going to die, that they were going to dip, and Hakeem Butler steps up, and Dave Montgomery is there. And then you see, well, they lost Hakeem Butler and Dave Montgomery in 1 year. Well, then Breece Hall shows up the next season, and all of a sudden the Iowa State offense jumps from like 45th in efficiency to like 9th, even though you lost your 2 of your 5 best skill players ever. So it's a build that it doesn't feel like a flash in the pan. It doesn't look like a flash in the pan. It feels like a stable foundation, and one that's going to continue to be built upon for a long time, as long as Matt Campbell is here, and even beyond him. It's said it's built to be successful beyond Matt Campbell, whenever that even happens. So you keep building that out, and they've got running backs. They've got 4-star Breece Hall, but behind him they've got 4-star Jarrell Brock, and they've got some really good guys behind him. They keep building up, and they keep just replacing pieces of their foundation with pieces of their foundation. But that culture is what kind of glues it all together, and that's what you see is the difference between Alabama and Texas. Alabama and Texas recruit not that far apart. They're pretty much on the same level recruiting wise, but Alabama's Alabama and Texas is Texas. because Alabama has a great culture, has a great program culture that goes with it. And Iowa State is trying to build that Alabama culture while we slowly build up to the Alabama recruiting. That takes a lot longer, and you have to have program prestige, and you have to have, to a certain extent, money, which Iowa State has a lot less of than most people. But they do still have enough. They can keep building on. Jamie Pollard, the athletic director, keeps buying new facilities from Matt Campbell. They keep building out. They've got a new $115 sports nutrition center that'll be completed in the fall. They've done lots of stuff to help out Matt Campbell, give him what he needs to be successful. But in the end, you can spend all the money in the world you want. You can get all the 5-star recruits you want. But if you don't have a program culture that can sustain that and that can build upon that foundation going forward, it's all going to fall apart. It's a house of cards. Matt Campbell's building this house out of concrete. He's building it up block by block, so that way it can't just be torn down with one piece. And that's the really remarkable part of how he's done it.